June 4, 1942. Pacific Ocean, 1,135 miles northwest of Pearl Harbor. Admiral Chuichi Nagumo stood on the bridge of the aircraft carrier Akagi, studying intelligence reports that filled him with quiet satisfaction. American naval forces had been scattered across the Pacific, their battle line destroyed at Pearl Harbor just 6 months earlier. What remained of their carrier fleet posed little threat to the Imperial Japanese Navy, which had swept across the ocean like an unstoppable tsunami of steel and determination. The numbers told a story of complete Japanese dominance. Since December 7, 1941, Imperial forces had conquered the Philippines, captured Singapore, overrun the Dutch East Indies, and pushed Allied defenders from every strategic position across thousands of miles of ocean. Japanese naval aviation had proven superior in every engagement. Their Mitsubishi A-6M0 fighters had outclassed every Allied aircraft they encountered. Their Nakajima B-5N torpedo bombers had sunk battleships, carriers, and cruisers with devastating precision. The rising sun flew over an empire that stretched from the Aleutians to the edge of Australia. Admiral Isoroku Yamamoto, architect of the Pearl Harbor attack, had conceived Operation MI as the final stroke that would eliminate American naval power from the Pacific forever. Midway Atoll, that tiny speck of coral and sand 1,300 miles from Hawaii, would serve as bait to lure the remaining American carriers into a carefully prepared trap. 4 of Japan's finest aircraft carriers, Akagi, Kaga, Soryu, and Hiryu, steamed toward their target with supreme confidence. Their combined air groups included over 270 of the world's most advanced carrier aircraft, flown by pilots whose combat experience exceeded that of any naval aviators in history. Japanese naval intelligence had assessed American capabilities with mathematical precision. The United States Pacific Fleet possessed perhaps 3 operational carriers after the Battle of the Coral Sea. Their aircraft were obsolescent designs, inferior to Japanese types in speed, maneuverability, and armament. Most critically, American torpedo bombers were considered a joke by Japanese fighter pilots who had encountered them in previous battles. The Douglas TBD Devastator, backbone of American torpedo squadrons, represented everything wrong with American naval aviation in Japanese estimation. These lumbering monoplanes, designed in the mid-1930s, crawled through the air at maximum speeds, barely exceeding 200 miles per hour when carrying torpedoes. Their Mark 13 torpedoes were notoriously unreliable, requiring precise delivery conditions that made the attacking aircraft sitting ducks for defending fighters. Japanese pilots who had engaged Devastators during the Coral Sea battle reported them as pathetically easy targets, slower than Japanese dive bombers and far more vulnerable than any combat aircraft deserved to be. What the Japanese couldn't know was that 1,200 miles to the northeast, American codebreakers had achieved the intelligence coup of the Pacific War. Commander Joseph Rochefort and his team at Station Haipyo in Pearl Harbor had penetrated Japan's most secret naval communications, breaking the JN-25 cipher that coordinated Imperial fleet operations. They knew Operation MY targeted Midway. They knew the exact composition of Nagumo's strike force. They knew when the attack would come. Admiral Chester Nimitz, Commander-in-Chief of the Pacific Fleet, positioned his available carriers in a carefully planned ambush. USS Enterprise and Hornet, veterans of the Doolittle raid, took station northeast of Midway alongside the hastily repaired Yorktown, her Coral Sea damage patched with steel plates and determination. The trap was set, but success would depend on timing, courage, and weapons the Japanese had dismissed as worthless. Dawn on June 4th brought clear skies and calm seas. At 0430 hours, Nagumo launched the first strike against Midway's airfields and shore installations. 108 aircraft, including 36 Nakajima B-5N torpedo bombers configured as level bombers, roared off the flight decks of Akagi, Kaga, Soryu, and Hiryu. The strike force commander, Lieutenant Joichi Tominaga, led his formations toward the American base with complete confidence in Japanese tactical superiority. The attack on Midway proceeded exactly as planned. Japanese bombers devastated fuel storage facilities, destroyed parked aircraft, and pounded defensive positions. But American resistance proved fiercer than expected. Marine fighters, though outnumbered and outclassed, fought with desperate determination. Anti-aircraft batteries engaged Japanese formations throughout their attack runs. Most significantly, Tominaga radioed back to Nagumo that a second strike would be necessary to completely suppress Midway's defenses. This message created the first crack in Japanese planning. Nagumo's remaining aircraft were spotted on deck, armed with armor-piercing bombs and torpedoes for use against enemy ships. Converting them for a second land attack would require precious time to change ordnance loads. The admiral hesitated, weighing tactical options while his ships steamed steadily toward their planned launching positions. At 0728 hours, everything changed. A Japanese reconnaissance aircraft reported sighting American naval forces to the northeast. The pilot's initial message was frustratingly vague, reporting 10 ships but no details about their composition. Nagumo faced an agonizing decision. Should he launch immediately against unknown American forces, or continue preparing for the second Midway strike? Minutes passed as additional reconnaissance reports trickled in, each adding crucial details about American strength and position. The fateful message arrived at 0820. The reconnaissance pilot confirmed what Japanese intelligence had insisted was impossible. American aircraft carriers were operating within striking distance of Nagumo's force. The trap had become mutual, but the Japanese retained numerical superiority and better aircraft. Nagumo ordered immediate. American carrier air groups were already airborne. Preparation for carrier strikes, but his planes needed time to rearm and refuel. Meanwhile, Enterprise, Hornet, and Yorktown had launched their available aircraft in several uncoordinated waves, following the aggressive doctrine that emphasized immediate attack over careful preparation. The composition of these strikes reflected American material limitations. Fighters were in short supply, with most squadrons operating well below authorized strength. Dive bombers carried outdated models alongside newer aircraft. Most critically, torpedo squadrons flew the despised Douglas TBD Devastators, aircraft so obsolescent that their crews called them flying coffins. Torpedo Squadron 8 from USS Hornet exemplified both American determination and American equipment limitations. Lieutenant Commander John Waldron led 15 Devastators toward the Japanese fleet, following a course that diverged from the main striking force when navigation errors separated the squadrons. Waldron, a veteran naval aviator of Lakota heritage, had drilled his pilots relentlessly in torpedo attack procedures. He understood their aircraft's limitations and the probable outcome of unescorted attacks against superior Japanese fighters, yet he pressed forward because the mission demanded it. The first sighting of Japanese carriers came at 0920 hours. 4 massive ships steamed in formation, their flight decks crowded with aircraft preparing for launch. 0 fighters circled overhead in defensive patrols, while destroyer screens provided anti-aircraft protection. The sight that greeted VT-8 represented the finest naval aviation force ever assembled, confident in its superiority and eager to engage the obsolescent American attackers approaching at wave-top level. Waldron's attack demonstrated everything wrong with American torpedo doctrine and everything right with American fighting spirit. The Devastators approached in standard formation, maintaining steady course and speed to ensure accurate torpedo drops. This predictable attack profile made them perfect targets for defending Zeros, which dove from altitude with overwhelming speed and firepower advantages. One by one, American torpedo bombers were shot down by fighters or destroyed by anti-aircraft fire from the carriers and their escorts. The slaughter was methodical and complete. Japanese pilots reported American aircraft burning and crashing into the Pacific in rapid succession. Within minutes, all 15 Devastators had been destroyed. Only one man survived the massacre. Ensign George Gay, shot down while making his torpedo run, floated in the ocean clinging to a seat cushion, watching the battle unfold around him while Japanese ships passed overhead, their crews unaware of the lone American witness to their apparent triumph. But VT-8's destruction was only the beginning. Torpedo Squadron 6 from Enterprise and Torpedo Squadron 3 from Yorktown followed separate courses toward the same target, equally unescorted and equally doomed. The mathematical result was predictable. Out of 41 American torpedo bombers launched that morning, 35 would be shot down without scoring a single hit on Japanese ships. The Mark 13 torpedoes that did reach their targets malfunctioned, running too deep or failing to explode on impact. Japanese fighter pilots reported the engagement as almost disappointingly easy. American torpedo planes had proven even more vulnerable than intelligence estimates suggested. They flew straight and level during attack runs, making no evasive maneuvers. Their defensive armament was inadequate against high-speed fighters attacking from optimal positions. Most damaging to American prospects, their torpedoes appeared to be defective even when delivered under ideal conditions. What the Japanese couldn't see from their cockpits was the strategic effect of the torpedo attacks. By drawing defensive fighters down to sea level and forcing anti-aircraft gunners to concentrate on low-altitude threats, the doomed American squadrons had created exactly the tactical opportunity that would determine the battle's outcome. Japanese combat air patrols, pulled out of position by successive torpedo attacks, left their carriers vulnerable to threats from different directions and altitudes. At 10:15 hours, the tactical picture above the Japanese carriers had become precisely what American planners had never dared hope for. 3 successive torpedo attacks had drawn every available Zero fighter down to wave-top altitude, their pilots focused entirely on destroying the lumbering American attackers below. Japanese combat air patrol commanders, trained in aggressive fighter doctrine, had committed their aircraft to low-altitude intercepts, abandoning the defensive perimeter that protected their carriers from high-altitude threats. The mathematics of aerial combat had shifted in ways invisible to participants on both sides. Japanese carriers steamed in formation with their flight decks crowded with aircraft being hastily rearmed for strikes against American carriers. Fuel lines snaked across steel decks as ground crews worked frantically to prepare bombers and fighters for launch. Aviation gasoline, bombs, and torpedoes created a volatile mixture that transformed each carrier into a floating arsenal awaiting ignition. Above this scene of urgent preparation, American dive bombers approached from altitudes the Japanese defensive system had temporarily abandoned. Lieutenant Commander Wade McCluskey, leading Enterprise Air Group 6, had been searching for the Japanese fleet for over an hour, his fuel gauges showing dangerously low readings that threatened to abort the mission entirely. Navigation errors had sent his formations far from their intended intercept point, forcing a desperate gamble on fuel reserves that left no margin for extended combat operations. McCluskey's decision to follow a lone Japanese destroyer racing northeast proved the critical choice that determined the battle's outcome. The destroyer Arashi, detached from the main force to depth-charge the American submarine Nautilus, provided an unwitting beacon target. At 10:20 hours, McClue that led the American dive bombers directly to the Urski spotted the 4 Japanese carriers spread across miles of ocean, their wakes creating white arrows pointing toward American victory. The sight that greeted Bombing Squadron 6 exceeded every tactical dream conceived by American naval planners. 4 enemy carriers steaming in formation, their decks packed with aircraft, their defensive fighters engaged at sea level against non-existent torpedo threats. The Japanese had achieved perfect vulnerability through their own tactical success against American torpedo squadrons. McCluskey's attack coordination demonstrated the lethal efficiency that American naval aviation could achieve when circumstances aligned properly. He assigned Bombing Squadron 6 to attack the nearest carrier, while Scouting Squadron 6 engaged a second target. The dive bombing technique perfected through months of training transformed into devastating reality as American aircraft rolled into their attack dives from 17,000 feet. Simultaneously, Yorktown's Air Group 3, led by Lieutenant Commander Maxwell Leslie, arrived over the Japanese formation from a different approach vector. Leslie's pilots had navigated independently after losing contact with other American formations, but their timing proved flawless. As Enterprise squadrons dove toward Kaga and Akagi, Yorktown's bombers selected Soryu as their primary target. The next 5 minutes rewrote the strategic balance of the Pacific War. American dive bombers, flying Douglas SBD dauntless aircraft that Japanese intelligence had dismissed as obsolescent, delivered bombing attacks of unprecedented accuracy and devastating effect. The Dauntless, designed in the late 1930s, possessed characteristics that made it ideal for carrier operations despite its lack of glamorous performance specifications. The SBD's dive brakes allowed precise speed control during attack runs, enabling pilots to maintain accurate aim while diving at steep angles. Its heavy construction absorbed battle damage that would have destroyed lighter aircraft. Most critically, the Dauntless could deliver 1,000-pound bombs with pinpoint accuracy from altitudes that made interception nearly impossible. At 10:22 hours, the first American bomb struck Akagi's flight deck. The explosion detonated among fully fueled aircraft spotted for launch, creating a chain reaction that transformed the carrier into a blazing inferno within seconds. Admiral Nagumo's flagship, symbol of Japanese naval supremacy since Pearl Harbor, became a burning wreck that would sink before midnight. Kaga suffered identical devastation moments later as Bombing Squadron 6 completed its attack run. Multiple bomb hits among the carrier's aircraft created explosions that could be seen from 50 miles away. The ship's aviation gasoline storage areas erupted in flames that made firefighting impossible, condemning the vessel and most of her crew to destruction. Soryu endured the same fate as Yorktown's dive bombers achieved perfect bombing accuracy, despite attacking without fighter escort or coordinated timing with other American formations. 3 direct hits penetrated the carrier's flight deck and detonated among spotted aircraft, creating fires that spread throughout the ship's structure within minutes. Japanese damage control procedures, highly effective against conventional battle damage, proved useless against fires fueled by aviation gasoline and exploding ordnance. The carriers had been transformed into floating bombs by their own preparations for offensive operations. Every tactical advantage that should have ensured Japanese victory became the mechanism of Japanese destruction. The psychological impact on Japanese personnel exceeded even the material devastation. Veteran pilots who had dominated Pacific skies since December 1941 watched helplessly as their bases burned around them. Ground crews who had serviced aircraft through months of victorious campaigns found themselves trapped aboard sinking ships. The invincible Kido Butai, striking arm of Japanese naval expansion, was dying in flames created by American aircraft they had dismissed as inferior. Hiryu, the sole surviving Japanese carrier, attempted immediate retaliation. Lieutenant Commander Kakuichi Takahashi led 18 dive bombers and 6 fighters toward the American fleet, guided by reconnaissance reports that identified Yorktown as the nearest enemy carrier. The attack achieved tactical success, scoring 3 bomb hits that severely damaged the American vessel and forced her crew to abandon ship temporarily. But Japanese success proved fleeting and insufficient. American damage control techniques, perfected through hard experience and superior training, enabled Yorktown's crew to return aboard their damaged carrier and restore partial operations within hours. The ship that Japanese pilots reported sinking remained afloat and operational, a testament to American engineering and seamanship that confounded enemy intelligence assessments. More critically for Japanese prospects, Hiryu's attack had revealed her position to American scout aircraft. Enterprise launched a second strike within hours, sending 24 dive bombers to complete the destruction of Nagumo's carrier force. At 1700 hours, American bombs transformed Hiryu into the same blazing wreck that had consumed her sister ships hours earlier. The strategic implications became apparent to Japanese commanders with stunning rapidity. 4 fleet carriers, the backbone of Japanese naval aviation, lay burning or sunk in the waters northwest of Midway. With them died over 200 aircraft and hundreds of irreplaceable veteran air crew, whose experience could not be duplicated through training programs or industrial production. Admiral Yamamoto, monitoring the disaster from his flagship Yamato, faced the collapse of Japanese offensive capability in the Central Pacific. His carefully planned operation had achieved the opposite of its intended effect. Instead of destroying American naval power, Midway had gutted Japanese carrier aviation and handed strategic initiative to an enemy that Japan had consistently underestimated. The Battle of Midway's outcome validated American intelligence capabilities, tactical doctrine, and industrial production in ways that transformed the Pacific War's trajectory permanently. Japanese naval supremacy, established through Pearl Harbor and sustained through 6 months of unbroken victory, had been shattered by the very forces that Japanese planners had dismissed as inadequate and obsolescent. The torpedo squadrons that Japanese fighter pilots had destroyed so easily had achieved strategic victory through their destruction. Their sacrifice had positioned American dive bombers for attacks that changed naval warfare forever, proving that in modern combat, tactical failure could enable strategic success through proper coordination and unwavering determination. The burning carriers drifted across 30 miles of Pacific waters, their funeral pyres visible from the horizon, as Admiral Yamamoto absorbed reports that shattered every assumption about American fighting capability. 4 fleet carriers, the striking heart of Japanese naval aviation, had been reduced to blazing wrecks within 6 hours. The mathematics of destruction exceeded even the most pessimistic Japanese planning scenarios. Over 250 aircraft destroyed, hundreds of irreplaceable veteran aircrew killed or missing, and the offensive capability that had dominated Pacific waters since December 1941, eliminated in a single afternoon. From his flagship Yamato, positioned 300 miles northwest of the disaster, Yamamoto contemplated strategic implications that extended far beyond tactical defeat. Japanese naval doctrine had been built around the concentrated power of carrier task forces operating in coordinated formations. The Kido Butai represented not just 4 ships, but the accumulated expertise of a generation of naval aviators whose combat experience began in China and reached its peak during the 6 months of unbroken Pacific victories following Pearl Harbor. The loss transcended mere numbers. Japanese pilot training programs, designed for peacetime expansion, could not rapidly replace the veteran aircrew whose skills had been developed through years of actual combat operations. American industrial capacity, which Japanese planners had consistently underestimated, could replace carriers and aircraft within months. Japanese shipyards and aircraft factories, already straining under wartime production demands, faced years of reconstruction to restore the capability destroyed in those 5 decisive minutes above the burning flight decks. Ensign George Gay, floating in his life vest among the debris of Torpedo Squadron 8, witnessed the transformation of Japanese supremacy into American ascendancy from the unique perspective of sole survivor. His position in the water, sustained by a punctured life raft and sheer determination, provided a front-row seat to the most decisive naval engagement since Trafalgar. Gay watched Japanese destroyers race past his position, their crews unaware that an American aviator observed their desperate attempts to rescue survivors from the burning carriers. The irony was not lost on the young pilot who had trained for months in an aircraft his instructors knew was obsolete. The Douglas TBD Devastator, with its inadequate speed and vulnerable torpedo delivery profile, had been dismissed by Japanese fighter pilots as target practice. Yet the destruction of every torpedo squadron had created the tactical conditions that enabled American dive bombers to achieve perfect surprise against undefended targets. Gay's survival testimony, recorded weeks later in Pearl Harbor hospitals, provided American intelligence officers with detailed observations of Japanese damage control procedures, ship movements, and tactical responses under extreme stress. His account revealed that Japanese carriers, despite their reputation for superior design, proved as vulnerable to sustained fires as any warship when their flight decks were crowded with fueled aircraft and armed ordnance. The strategic transformation extended beyond immediate tactical results. Japanese naval communications, intercepted and decoded by American cryptanalysts, revealed panic and confusion within the Imperial Navy's command structure. Admiral Nagumo's reports to Combined Fleet Headquarters described devastation that contradicted every Japanese assumption about American fighting capabilities and equipment effectiveness. The Douglas SBD Dauntless dive bombers that achieved decisive success had been considered inferior to Japanese aircraft by pre-war intelligence assessments. Their maximum speed barely exceeded that of Japanese bombers, their armament was conventional, and their range limitations required careful mission planning. Yet the Dauntless possessed characteristics that proved decisive in carrier operations. Its robust construction absorbed battle damage, its dive brakes enabled precision bombing accuracy, and its reliability under combat stress exceeded that of more sophisticated designs. Lieutenant Commander Richard Best, leading Bombing Squadron 6 during the attack on Akagi, demonstrated the tactical expertise that American naval aviation had developed through intensive training programs. His decision to concentrate multiple aircraft against single targets ensured devastating results rather than dispersed damage across multiple carriers. Best's bombing accuracy, achieved while diving through anti-aircraft fire at terminal velocity, represented the culmination of years of peacetime preparation that finally found application in combat. The Japanese carriers' vulnerability resulted from their own tactical success against American torpedo attacks. Standard defensive doctrine required maintaining clear flight decks during combat operations, but the continuous torpedo threats had forced Japanese commanders to keep aircraft spotted topside while hastily rearming them for carrier strikes. This decision, tactically sound when facing individual threats, proved catastrophic when concentrated dive bombing attacks struck among fully fueled and armed aircraft. The final lesson of Midway extends far beyond tactical analysis or strategic planning. It reveals the fundamental truth that wars are won not by the most advanced weapons or the most sophisticated tactics, but by the courage of individuals who understand that their mission transcends their own survival. The torpedo squadrons that Japanese pilots had dismissed as obsolete proved that in the crucible of combat, determination matters more than technology. Sacrifice creates opportunity, and sometimes the greatest victories emerge from the ashes of apparent defeat. Their legacy reminds us that freedom's price is measured not in the perfection of our tools, but in the willingness of ordinary people to do extraordinary things when history demands it.